Let's have a brief prayer. Father, in the name of our Master Yeshua, your Son, great King of heaven, we come before you. And we ask you to give us this day our daily bread, for it is sufficient for the day. Open our eyes to see and our ears to hear, Father. Speak to us through your word by your Spirit. In Yeshua's name, amen. All right, we are plugging along in the book of Genesis. You can find Genesis chapter 31. We're going to start at the end of this Torah portion. Vayetzei is the Hebrew term for this Torah portion. And it means, and he went. The title for today is Elohim Knows What He Is Doing. Elohim knows what he is doing. If you missed Bible study this morning, you should try and get it when it goes up on the website, because it dovetails very beautifully into what we're going to talk about today. Elohim knows what he is doing. Genesis 31, and I didn't teach Bible study this morning, so that makes it even more beautiful, the way the Father knit it together. Genesis 31, and we're going to read verse 42, and then we're going to backtrack. It says, "Unless the Elohim of my father, the Elohim of Avraham and the fear of Yitzchak had been with me, you would have now sent me away empty-handed. Elohim has seen my affliction and the labor of my hands and rendered judgment last night." So Elohim ruled in favor of Jacob, and we'll get back to this. I want that verse to sink into your brain. But let's have a little overview. So here's what's going to happen in this Torah portion. If you didn't get to read it, Jacob is commanded by his father to go from the land of Canaan and to go to the land of his forefathers and to the house of his mother, Rebekah's house. And his father's very specific. He says, take a wife from the daughters of your mother's brother Laban. Like, he's very, very detailed in what he tells him. So he's commanded to go get a wife. Along the journey, Jacob comes to a place called Luz, and he lays down and he sleeps for the night, and he has a dream. You guys remember Jacob's dream with the ladder and the angels going up and down, and the Father, the King of Heaven, is standing at the top of the ladder, and he gives him a word. Jacob wakes up, and he renames the place Bethel. He says, this must be the house of El. This must be the house of God. So then Jacob goes all the way to the land of where Laban lives, and it's amazing. He doesn't just get one wife, he gets two wives, but he doesn't just get two wives, he actually gets 4 wives. There's all this multiplication going on in his life. So 2 wives plus 2 wives, 11 sons, 1 daughter, and a whole lot of livestock. And this is kind of the overview of what happens. All right, so let's go back to the beginning. Genesis 28. Verse 10, and Jacob went out from Beersheba and went toward Haran, and he came upon a place and stopped over for the night, for the sun had set. And he took one of the stones of that place and put it at his head. And he lay down in that place to sleep. Now, I don't know if he used the stone as a pillow or not, but I don't know. I would not use a stone for a pillow. And he dreamed and saw a ladder set up on the earth, and its top reached to the heavens, and saw messengers of Elohim going up and coming down on it. And see, Yehovah stood above it and said, I am Yehovah Elohim of Avraham, your father, and the Elohim of Yitzchak. The land on which you are lying, I give it to you and your seed. Now this is interesting to me. He says, I am Yehovah Elohim of Avraham, your father. He doesn't say Isaac, your father. He says Avraham, Abraham, your father. And that kind of piqued my interest. I said, why? Why? If you remember, we talked about quite a while back, being a child of Abraham, being a son of Abraham, and what that meant. And so along those lines, I was thinking, how is Jacob like Abraham? Never mind Isaac, but how is Jacob like Abraham? How are they similar? Any thoughts? Any ideas? How are Jacob and Abraham similar? There's one that's right there in front of your face. Okay, told to leave their land. Okay, that's not the one that's right there. This one's even simpler than that. They both had their names changed. And the Father's the one who, the King of Heaven is the one who changes both of their names, right? It wasn't man that said, hey, you got a new name. But the Father changes Abraham's name, right, from Abram to Abraham. And he changes Jacob's name from Jacob to what? Israel. Now there's something in there, and we're going to look at the details of this. See, Jacob's name is changed. Well, let's start with Abraham. So the Father changes Abraham's name long after Abraham believed in the promise, right? Genesis 15, Abraham believes in the promise of the Father, and it's accounted to him as righteousness, and the promise was, I'm going to give you a seed, I'm going to give you a land, your seed is going to multiply on the earth. He believed all of that, and it's not till, I think it's Genesis 17, where the Father actually changes his name. And it was like 20 years. 20 years of time went by before the Father actually changed his name, which is really similar to Jacob's. Jacob actually goes 20 years from when the Father says this to him, that I'm the Elohim of your father Abraham and the Elohim of Isaac. From that point till he returns and the Father changes his name is 20 years. But what's interesting about that is Jacob's name is changed after his character is changed. So the Father isn't changing names just because, and he doesn't change names ahead of time. In other words, he sees a shift and then changes the name. Or he goes about seeing that this change happens, and then he changes the name. If you looked at this Torah portion and you read it in detail, you understand that when Jacob returns from Laban, he's a very different man than when he left his dad's house. So let's look at this progression, right? When Jacob leaves his dad's house, what just happened? He had just stole his brother's birthright. He had just stole his brother's blessing. And his brother's about to kill him, right? So he's still acting like Jacob, the heel grabber, the supplanter. And Jacob goes on his way to get a wife. And we're going to pick up in Genesis 29. And he hasn't gotten to Laban yet. In Genesis 29, in verse 4, it says, so Jacob said to them, he runs into these men along the way, my brothers, where are you from? And they said, we are from Haran. And he said to them, do you know Laban, son of Nahor? And they said, we know him. So he said to them, is he well? And they said, well, and see his daughter Rachel or Rachel is coming with the sheep. And he said, see, it is still high day. So this is Jacob responding to these men. Now these men are shepherds. That's what they do for a living. Do you remember who Jacob was? Jacob was a dweller in tents. He wasn't a shepherd. Now he's going to tell these guys how to do their job. And he says, see, it's still high day, not the time for the livestock to be gathered. Water the sheep and go feed them. But they said to him, we are not allowed until all the flocks are gathered together, and they have rolled the stone from the well's mouth. Then we water the sheep. Now, I don't know who the they is here. But let's read on. While he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for for she was a shepherdess. And it came to be when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, that Jacob went near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. Now, to me, this is same old Jacob. He just was told by these guys, listen, we are not allowed to take the stone off until everyone is gathered. Jacob sees Rachel come. He goes, I'm going to take the stone off, and takes the stone off so that Rachel's flock can be watered. It seems to me that he's the same old Jacob. And this comes after the father speaks to him, right at Bethel, and gives him the promise. And even Jacob gives the father a promise. And we'll look at that in a little bit. But the point I see here is that I don't see any difference in this Jacob, who's to me the same Jacob that took his brother's birthright. And he definitely manipulates that situation. And he absolutely steals his brother's blessing. I feel like this, what we're seeing is and I guess it could be a representation of us at different times in our lives where we think we can just do whatever we want. And we have the right to do it because we think it's our right to just do it. And it seems like sometimes even the further we get along in the church, the more right we think we have to just do what we want. So then Jacob gets to Laban. And we'll jump a little bit further forward. And so Jacob kisses Rachel, and Rachel runs to tell Laban, and Laban comes running. Here's the son of my sister. And so verse 13, and it came to be when Laban heard the report about Jacob, his sister's son, that he ran to meet him and embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house. Then he told Laban all these matters, and Laban said to him, you are indeed my bone and my flesh. And he stayed with him for a month. So Jacob stays with Laban for an entire month without telling him why he's there. Doesn't tell him at all in that whole month. And Laban said to, okay, let's keep going. Then Laban said to Jacob, because you are my relative, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Well, it seems that Laban had put Jacob to work. He didn't let him just stay there for a month and mooch. So Laban says, you're my relative. You shouldn't serve me for nothing. Let me know what should be your wages. And Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. And Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was beautiful of form and beautiful of appearance. And Yaakov loved Rachel. So he said, let me serve you 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter. And Laban said, it's better that I give her to you than I should give her to another man. Stay with me. So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of the love he had for her. Then Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife, for my days are completed, and let me go into her. And Laban gathered all the men of the place and made a feast, and it came to be in the evening that he took Leah, his daughter, and brought her to Jacob. And he went into her, and Laban gave his female servant Zilpah to his daughter Leah as a female servant. And in the morning it came to be that, see, it was Leah. So he said to Laban, what is this you have done to me? It must have been really dark. That's all I got to say. I mean, it must have been pitch black. Because there ain't no way I'm going to be deceived like that unless it's pitch black. And here's Jacob, who not that long ago had just tricked his brother out of his birthright, had just stole his brother's blessing. And now Laban pulls a fast one on him. I don't know how mad Jacob was. But it seems to me he's getting a taste of his own medicine. What is this you have done to me? Was it not for Rachel that I served you? Why then have you deceived me? And Laban, it seems, is using, in a way, Jacob's ignorance against him, because Jacob didn't understand the customs of where he was. So Laban says in verse 26, "It is not done this way in our place to give the younger before the firstborn." So it seems maybe Laban had this plan all along. "Complete the week of this one, then we give you this one too, for the service which you shall serve with me still another 7 years." So Jacob serves Laban for 7 years. And in his mind, at the end of 7 years, he's getting Rachel. Doesn't get Rachel, gets Leah. And Laban says, okay, when the week of this one is over, so 7 days, there's no exaggeration about this. In a span of 7 days' time, Jacob went from having no wives to having 2 wives. And so after 7 days, and I can't even imagine making another arrangement with a man who already tricked me that bad. But it seems maybe Jacob still is the same old Jacob. So he agrees to the arrangement. 7 days later, he takes Rachel, and then from that point, he serves 7 years for Rachel. Right? And Jacob, verse 28, did so and completed her week. Then he gave him his daughter, Rachel, too, as wife. Now let's jump a little bit further forward to Genesis chapter 30. We're going to pick up in verse 25. I want you to see all these dealings between Laban and Jacob. He's making all these arrangements with Laban. Just as a side note, Laban, or Levan is really what his name is, means white. Genesis 30, verse 25, "And it came to be when Rachel had borne Joseph, that Jacob said to Laban," so they're there for this whole time, and in that whole time, now, all of a sudden, Jacob has now 11 children. 11 sons and a daughter, so 12 children. "And it came to be when Rachel had borne Joseph that Jacob said to Laban, 'Send me on my way to go to my own place and to my land. Give my wives and my children for whom I have served you, and let me go. For you yourself know my service which I have done for you.'" So Jacob's saying, I did everything you asked in order to make these arrangements with you. I'm out of here. And Laban said to him, now look at this, "If I have found favor in your eyes, please stay, for I have diligently watched that Yehovah has blessed me for your sake." Some translations say discerned. "And he said, 'Name me your wages, and I give it.' So Jacob said to him, 'You know how I have served you, and how your livestock has been with me. For the little you have had before I came has increased greatly. Yehovah has blessed you since my coming. But now when am I to provide for my own house too?' And he said, 'What do I give you?'" Now here's Jacob. Still working deals, right? And Jacob says, "You don't have to give me anything if you do this for me. I shall again feed and guard your flocks. Let me pass through all your flocks today, remove from there all the speckled and spotted sheep, and all the black ones among the lambs, and the spotted and speckled among the goats. And these shall be my wages. And my righteousness shall answer for me in time to come. When you come concerning my wages, every one that is not speckled and spotted among the goats, and black among the lambs, it is stolen if it is with me. And Laban said, "See, let it be according to your word." You know, when I read this stuff, I feel like these two men are, in essence, equals. They are equally as deceptive. They are equally as cunning. They are equally as manipulative to work their advantage. And so there's the potential. I mean, clearly Laban's making this deal, and the majority of the flock must not have been spotted and speckled and black, because otherwise you don't make that arrangement. But it seems to be a very fair deal, right? It's an easy way to count sheep. There's a black one, it's yours. There's a non-black one, it's yours. And there's a spotted one, yours. There's a non-spotted one, yours. It's very simple, right? So let's see, how far do we need to go? I think we went far enough. Well, what happens in this scenario is that Jacob goes about ensuring that his flock increases, but he still takes care of Laban's flock. He's not trying to diminish Laban's flock. He's not trying to, I think he is trying to deceive, but I don't think he's trying to harm Laban, if you understand what I'm saying. And so let's go to Genesis 31. And this is what happens in the culmination of this. "And he heard the words of Laban's sons, saying, Jacob has taken away all that was our father's. And from what belonged to our father, he has made all this wealth. And Jacob would look at the face of Laban and see that it was not toward him as before." Jacob lost favor in the eyes of Laban because in the separation, and you got to understand that some of this is of the hand of the father. The separation, when Jacob separated himself out from Laban, these are mine, these are yours. The father's hand on Jacob caused what was Jacob's to be blessed. Where what was of Laban's, Jacob was still working with, so there was a blessing, but it wasn't the same blessing. Do you understand? They weren't dying, they weren't lost, and if they were, Jacob's really clear to tell us what happens. Jump to verse 17. "So Jacob rose and put his sons and his wives on camels, and he drove off all his livestock and all his possessions which he had acquired, his property of the livestock which he had acquired in Padan Aram, to go to his father Yitzchak in the land of Canaan. And when Laban had gone to shear his sheep, Rachel stole the house idols that were her father's. And Jacob deceived Laban, the Aramean." Now, this is the only time that Scripture says Jacob deceived him, because he did not inform him that he was about to flee. So Jacob just got up and left and didn't tell Laban. And Scripture says that in that he deceived him. He didn't deceive him in what he did with the livestock at all. "And he fled with all he had, and he rose up and passed over the river, and headed toward the mountains of Gilead. And on the third day," there's a third day reference there, "and on the third day Laban was told that Jacob had fled." Well, who is Laban? We talked about his name means white. He's an Aramean. He's of the same heritage as Abraham, as Sarah, as Isaac, as Rebekah. They all come from the same family, as Jacob, as Esau. But something's different about Laban. He's a pagan, and he worships pagan gods. Should Jacob have expected a pagan man to deal justly with him? Should he? Should we expect, when we make arrangements with people in the world, that they're going to deal justly and righteously with us? No. We shouldn't. Hopefully they do. And if they don't, we can take legal course. And then we have to hope that the court system's going to be legal. and just and righteous. Which doesn't happen a whole lot anymore. Should Jacob have expected him to deal righteously, to deal fairly, to even deal kindly with him? He's a pagan man. And he proves it out of the words of his own mouth. All right, let's move a little bit further forward to verse 36. I want to see if I need to back up. All right, verse 36. And Jacob was wroth and contended with Laban. And Jacob answered and said to Laban, what is my transgression? What is my sin that you have hotly pursued me? Now that you have searched all my goods, what have you found? Of all your household goods, see it here before my brothers and your brothers, and let them decide between the two of us. Jacob's asking for his case to be heard. We need to back up. I'm looking for a verse. Probably. No. Okay, so go back to verse 29. So Laban has a dream. And in the dream, the king of heaven says, don't touch him. He says, don't do anything for good or evil towards him. Do nothing. Verse 29, when Laban is retelling this to Jacob, he says, it's in the power of my hand to do evil to you. He says this, but the Elohim of your father. He doesn't say my Elohim. The king of heaven was not the Elohim of Laban. Of your father spoke to me last night, saying, guard yourself that you do not speak to Jacob either good or evil. Now we can continue. Picking up in verse 38, Jacob says, these 20 years I have been with you. Your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried their young, and I have not eaten the rams of your sheep. That which was torn by beasts I did not bring to you, I myself bore the loss of it. You required it from my hand, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. Thus it was by day the heat consumed me, and the frost by night, and my sleep fled from my eyes. These 20 years I have been in your house. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters, and 6 years for your flock. Now listen to this. And you have changed my wages 10 times. Unless the Elohim of my father, the Elohim of Abraham, and the fear of Yitzhak had been with me, you would now have sent me away empty-handed. Elohim has seen my affliction and the labor of my hands and rendered judgment last night. I believe what's happening in this story is that the father is using Laban to change Jacob. I think Jacob in many ways was formed in the furnace of service to Laban. It's interesting to me that there's a 3rd day reference in the middle of this story. That on the 3rd day, Laban finds out he's gone and goes after him. And it's, those 3rd day references are always like resurrection, new man type references. And I think Jacob here is finally become a new man. Jacob just gets up and leaves because he's afraid of Laban. I don't think, though Scripture says he deceived him, I don't know as though Jacob in his own mind was looking at it that way at this point. He's no longer the heel grabber or the supplanter. He says that it was in the heat of the day and by the frost of the night, and my sleep fled from my eyes. In that hard labor and those trials, it seems he was being molded. When we go through great trials, challenges, pressures in life, we need to stop and take an assessment. And the reason why I say that is because here is Jacob at the end of going through these trials, these challenges, and these pressures, and he's able to take an assessment. And he can look around himself, and he can even say to Laban, I've done no wrong against you, Laban. And all that I have, all that I've amassed in this time that I was under these challenges and these trials and these pressures is all rightfully mine. And ultimately what Jacob becomes aware of is that all of that stuff was given to him by the hand of the King of Heaven. If it's not of the hand of Elohim, those trials, those challenges, those pressures, they will leave you empty-handed. If you're putting yourself in a mess that he isn't ordering, or if you're completely disregarding him and what his plan is for your life, you will end up empty-handed. But if those trials, those challenges, and those pressures are of him, an assessment of the situation will always prove it. Let's jump all the way to Genesis chapter 50. And I want to show you a few more examples in Scripture. Remember, we're talking today about the fact that Elohim knows what he's doing. Genesis 50, verse 19. And Joseph said to them, remember this backstory of this. Joseph's brothers take him and sell him to an Ishmaelite group, who then take him down and sell him into Egypt, and he's in slavery all this time. Famine, now his brothers come, now everybody's there. Joseph said to them, do not fear, for am I in the place of Elohim? And you intended evil against me, but Elohim intended it for good, in order to do it as it is this day, to keep a great many people alive. And now do not fear, I provide for you and your little ones. So he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. I think we could preach the same sermon that we're looking at today just from the life of Joseph, in the same way we're looking at the life of Jacob. Remember early on in Joseph's life, why do his brothers hate him? He's arrogant. He's prideful. He goes running around telling, hey guys, I had a dream. Could you imagine? Every time you saw your brother, he had some story about how he was better than you. It's no wonder they shredded the coat, right? But something happens to Joseph when he's in that hardship that changes him. Because he had all the power to make them his servants. You want food? Bow to me. You want food? You want your family to be good? Serve me. He could have done any of that. And he says, what you meant for evil, the Father meant for good. And our mind just goes to the wrong stuff every time. We're like, oh, what you meant to make me a slave and God meant to make me a king. You meant for me to have nothing and God meant for me to have everything. I think we're missing it. Because we don't understand tov. Tov, the Hebrew word for good, I've been telling you this over and over. Tov doesn't mean good stuff. Tov doesn't mean houses and lands and cars and boats and trucks and pretty women and all that other stuff that in our mind, society has told us these are the things that are good. Tov means in place, in time, doing what it's supposed to do. So when Joseph says to his brothers that what you meant for evil, the Father meant for good, meant it was at the right time, it was at the right place, and it did what it was supposed to do. That wasn't to give Jacob or to give Joseph a kingdom and to give him all this stuff. It was to change Joseph. So that when Joseph took part of all of the stuff, he would deal with it rightly. I can prove it. Go to Romans chapter 8. The King of Heaven is not concerned about stuff. He's concerned about you. And he knows what he's doing. Romans chapter 8, this is one of our favorite verses, especially when adversity hits and we're working all things together for my good. When everything's falling apart around us and we're like, he's working it for good. I just went bankrupt, but there's going to be good come out of it. This is what it says. Romans 8, verse 28 and 29. And we know that all matters work together for good to those who love Elohim. So all matters work together for good, so that there's a cumulative effort there. And then it's conditional. To those who love Elohim, to those who are called according to his purpose. Now listen to this, verse 29. We don't like to keep going and look at all the details, because those whom he knew beforehand, he also ordained beforehand to be conformed to the likeness of his Son, for him to be the firstborn among many brothers. Well, he gives us the purpose of the good. And he's showing us what the good is. To be conformed to the likeness of his Son. So when you're in adversity at the hand of the Father, the good that is going to come out of that is that it's going to make you look more like the Son. Not that you're going to get to the end and you're going to get a trophy or a lollipop. Right? You're not babies. My 2-year-old son, we got to give him a little treat every time he pees on the potty. That's not this. This is about changing your character, about changing your integrity, about changing your morality and your spirituality to make you look like the Son. The Father looks at Jacob and he says, I am the God of your father Abraham. He's calling him ahead of time. He don't look like Abraham at all. He's a sneaky trickster. That was not Abraham. But he's looking at him and he can see, because he's about to work good in his life and put him literally in almost slavery to Laban for 20 years, where he's working in the heat and in the cold and doesn't sleep for 20 years. My wife hasn't slept in like 2 years because we don't stop having children and she doesn't get any sleep. I don't know what 20 years would look like, but it's doing something. Yeshua on the cross, he says, it's finished, right? Remember that famous line? It's finished. And then we all talk about resting in the completed work of Messiah, and there's no more work left to do, except after he says it's finished, he gives a laundry list of things to do. I think what he's really saying, it is finished, I think he's saying it's Tov. He's saying, I did what I was supposed to in the time I was supposed to do it, the way it was supposed to be done. Because not everything was done. He's going to come back, and then there's going to be a giant war that he will win. But not everything's done. He finished his purpose for that time. It's really similar to when his Father finishes creation. When Elohim finished creation, you can see this in Genesis chapter 2, he calls it Gadol Tov, or very good. Good's not what we think, it's what he says. Messiah says it's finished, and he dies. Do you ever think of that? He wasn't resurrected in the moment. So the finished work of Messiah at that point was to die. And I think it's the same for us. If we're going to be like him, there has to be a point where the good, the tov that the Father's working in our lives leads us to death. Scripture's full of stuff that says if we don't die, we don't resurrect. If we don't die to this guy, if I don't die to this guy, I will never look like him. A good work in you is going to have the same result as what we're looking at in Romans 8 here. It's going to make you look like his son. You may not like it, and you may not even be able to call it good or see it's good. But on the backside, I bet you can. When it's all said and done, it's all over, and you go and you take an assessment of what just happened, and maybe there's nothing else that's in your hand except what changed here. Remember the children of Israel. And if you're in Bible study this morning, I made a pretty bold statement to say that one of the reasons I believe the Father put the children of Israel in Egypt was to transform them from being a bunch of arrogant men. Because the things that they did in Canaan were very arrogant and foolish. And they almost cost the lives of everybody. Remember with Dinah and that whole story with Shechem and all of that, and then they just go in and they kill everybody. And Jacob goes, "What are you guys doing?" The old Jacob might have been on board with that plan. But not the wiser, humbled Jacob that says, we don't just run around doing whatever we want. Just because we're the people of Elohim doesn't mean we tromp around the earth and do whatever we want. They come out of Israel, or come out of Egypt, with all kinds of treasure. You remember that? The Father says, go each one to his neighbor and ask them for treasure. But maybe the greatest treasure wasn't physical at all. It was to know that Elohim fought for them. Maybe that was the greatest treasure. Maybe the greatest treasure of the Exodus was to know that Elohim saw in them something worth fighting for, and he fought for them to bring them out. Maybe the greatest treasure wasn't anything they got either. It was knowing that they were the segula of Elohim. They were the crown jewel. Just trying to shift your perspective. Sometimes our challenges, our trials, our pressures are there to help us see that he's fighting for us. When there's no bread, when there's no water. Some of it is to cause us to understand that we can lean on him. What did Yeshua do when he had no bread? Man doesn't live by bread alone. Right? He was full of the word. He wasn't worried about it. Could he have turned them stones into bread? I don't know, but probably. All right, let's go to Psalm 124. You getting anywhere in this? Psalm 124. Elohim knows what he's doing with your life. You know, if he didn't put you in some of the stuff that you've been in before, are in now, you never would have changed. You never would have changed. Joe, you remember the story you tell everybody about how you ended up here? You know, if you weren't drifting around on that boat, you might not have changed. And I could say the same for me. If I didn't get kicked out of my parents' house, my wife didn't get kicked out of her parents' house. She got kicked out multiple times. I only got kicked out once. It was permanent. I wouldn't have changed. Dad, my dad, he tells me all the time, I think it was the worst decision I ever made. I said, Dad, I think it's the best decision you ever made. I said, don't ever regret that. It made me who I am. I was a kid. And my wife got kicked out. She lived in her car. She was stubborn. I moved in with my grandparents. It was like, going to the palace. But it still hurt. I still had to grow. And I'm sure everyone in this room, you could think of a handful of examples in your life that if that didn't happen to you, you never would have changed. All right, where are we? Psalm 124. If it had not been Yehovah who was on our side, let Yisrael now say, if it had not been Yehovah who was on our side, when men rose up against us, then they would have swallowed us alive. In their burning rage against us, now listen to this, then the waters would have overwhelmed us. This is judgment language. The stream would have gone over our being. Then the proud waters would have gone over our being. Blessed be Yehovah, who did not give us as prey to their teeth. Our being has escaped like a bird from the snare of the trappers. The snare was broken, and we have escaped. Our help is in the name of Yehovah, maker of the heavens and earth. See, Jacob could have wrote this. He didn't, but he could have. Because if it was not for Yehovah, when he went in the furnace of Laban's white. That's the hottest temperature is when it's white, not snow white, fire. When it is white, that is as hot as it gets. And if Yehovah wasn't with him, he said, unless the God of Abraham and the God of Jacob and the God of Isaac was with me, he says, this whole thing would have left me empty-handed. And the same for us. If some of these things had happened and it wasn't the hand of Elohim, or if he wasn't with us in the midst of it, some of these enemies we've encountered would have overwhelmed us. And you've heard me tell this story before, I got fired. I've only ever been fired from one job. I've lived like a life of luxury. How many have been fired from more than one job? Only one, two. Not many people would like to admit that. I only ever in my life got fired from one job, and I felt like it was so unjustified. And I remember walking into that meeting and had no idea I was getting fired. And I was so irate after that I wasn't even able to process. I still did the things I said to keep my character, but I was ticked off. I think I could say I was, in some way, I was feeling maybe the way Jacob was. Jacob's pretty mad in this whole thing, but he still did what he had to do. But my boss at the time, well, I guess he fired me, so he wasn't my boss anymore. One of the last things he said to me, he said, everybody's got to eat a little crow. It took me a lot of years to know what that meant. It took me a lot of years to have any concept of what that meant. Because I couldn't get past the fact that I didn't think I did anything wrong. And sometimes the only wrong we do is we just don't shut up. Sorry, you don't like me saying that. I'm talking to this guy right now. All of the accusations against me were false. Everyone. but the Father was doing something. That was a consuming job. And it was enough money that it's really hard to say no. And it was almost similar to Jacob. I didn't plan on sharing this at all, but now that I'm thinking about it, the beginning of that year, the Father spoke to me and said, this is your last year at that job. And I just tucked that somewhere in my brain and completely forgot about it until after I got fired. Because I walked in that meeting to prepare to share what I thought was what could help us further the company and be better for us for the next year. And I completely forgot. The Father promises Jacob when he's going into that trial that he's going to be with him. And so Jacob, in the end of that, says to him, okay, and if you're with me, when I come back, I will give you a tenth. I will give you a 10. I will give you a tithe. I think it's amazing that he had 11 sons. If you haven't heard the teachings I've done on tithes and offerings, it'll make so much more sense to you. But a tithe isn't 10%. It's the 10th one, just to give you that first piece out the gate. And so he has 11 sons. In the culmination of all of this stuff, the Father takes Levi as his own. If Jacob had 9 sons, he wouldn't have had a 10th to give him. It's the 10th one. Anyway, the point is, all of these things the Father has orchestrated in your life to mold you and to shape you and to change you. And if you hadn't endured them, you never would have changed. Some of y'all know me a long time. I hope you're able to see that the Father has made some progress in me. Let's go back to Genesis 31. And sometimes we're so blind to who we are. I remember before I was ordained, there was a meeting, and Pastor Don asked one of the members at the time who worked really closely, what do you think about us ordaining Chris? And they said, if it was a year ago, absolutely not. And I thought to myself, how horrible was I? You ever had that moment? How horrible was I? Because we can be so blind to ourselves. And even more so blind to what the Father's doing. All right, we're going to reread this, verse 36. And Jacob was wroth and contended with Laban, and Jacob answered and said to Laban, what is my transgression? What is my sin that you have hotly pursued me? Now that you have searched all my goods, what have you found of all your household goods? Set it here before my brothers and your brothers, and let them decide between the two of us. These 20 years I have been with you. Your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried. They're young, and I have not eaten the rams of your sheep. That which was torn by beasts I did not bring to you. I myself bore the loss of it. You required it from my hand, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. Thus I was by day. Heat consumed me, and the frost by night, and my sleep fled from my eyes. These 20 years I have been in your house. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flock, and you have changed my wages 10 times. Unless the Elohim of my father, the Elohim of Abraham, and the fear of Yitzhak had been with me, you would now have sent me away empty-handed. Elohim has seen my affliction and the labor of my hands, and rendered judgment last night. So he's saying that the Father rendered judgment in the dream that Laban had. When he told Laban, do not touch him, do not say anything either good or evil to him. But did you notice that Jacob says, Elohim has seen my affliction? So that's what Laban was doing to him. But then he says, and the labor of my hands. So in other words, Jacob's saying, the Father has seen what you've done to me, and the Father has seen what I have done to you. And he's rendered judgment in favor of me. We talked before about how, making arrangements with people in the world, we can't expect righteousness from them. But we better uphold our end of the bargain. Jacob did everything he said he would do, and because of that, he was blessed. Yeshua, in many ways, was the same. He never changed who he was based on how the people were acting towards him or treating him or what they were saying about him or what they were even trying to do to him. He knew they were trying to kill him, and he didn't even change who he was at all. He didn't go run and hide. He didn't try to kill them. He didn't act a fool. He didn't lose character. He didn't stop loving. Nothing about him changed. Remember, the Father knows what he's doing, and what he's doing is trying to make you look like the Son. You get dragged through the dirt, it doesn't matter. You don't drag someone else through the dirt. Don't get upset when a worldly job doesn't give you a raise or what you think you deserve. I love it when I hear it all the time. I didn't get my 2% this year. So, well, did they tell you when you signed up that you were even going to annually get a raise? Or did you just assume that? A lot of times, we're so blind to ourselves. We think we deserve things that maybe we don't. Never mind any of that. Elohim's our provision. We're worrying about the wrong things. Elohim has seen and rendered judgment last night. He's going to judge based on what he sees. Let's look at a few more things. Can you stand a little more? Go to 2 Samuel, chapter 7. David's getting old, and David wanted to, not this David, and David wanted to build a house for the King of Heaven. And he tells Nathan the prophet, and Nathan kind of speaks out of turn a little bit. He says, do whatever's in your heart. And he gets out the door, and the father says, go back. Comes back and says, David, you can't build that house. There's too much blood on your hands. He says, but your son is going to. We get to verse 14, and this is what it says. I am to be his father, and he is to be my son. If he does perversely, I shall reprove him with the rod of men and with the blows of the sons of men. But my loving commitment does not turn aside from him, as I turned it aside from Shaul, whom I removed from before you. Now this, if you were in Bible study, this fits right in the window of what Skylar was talking about this morning. I am to be his father, and he is to be my son. If he does perversely, I shall reprove him with the rod of men and with the blows of the sons of men. We have an option. We always have an option. And if we do our diligence to transform ourselves, and yes, you can, right? Israel always had the option to be obedient. They just didn't choose to. We always have that option. If we don't, we have this promise. He's going to use men, maybe women, maybe children, maybe an animal. Maybe you're riding on a donkey and he has to crush your leg against a wall to get your knuckle-headed brain to figure it out. Maybe he's got to throw you off the donkey and blind you, send you somewhere for 3 days where you're blind, and then off in the desert for 3 years to learn something before you can come back and be someone. Same thing happened to Paul. Shaul. He will reprove us. He's not concerned about the stuff. He wants to make something out of you. The stuff's the bonus. And let's go to Deuteronomy 28. Let's look at this. If you don't know Deuteronomy 28, I can promise you already love Deuteronomy 28. At least the first half. Or the first 13 verses. We're going to read the first 13 verses. You're going to hear a whole bunch of taken out of context Christianese in here if you've never read this before. And it shall be, if you diligently obey the voice of Yehovah your Elohim to guard to do all his commands, which I command you today, that Yehovah your Elohim shall set you high above all the nations of the earth. This is all conditional, based on obedience. And all these blessings shall come upon you and overtake you, if you obey the voice of Yehovah your Elohim. So just in case you didn't get that it's conditional on obedience, he says it twice, before he starts telling you where you're going to be blessed and how you're going to be blessed. Then he says, blessed are you in the city. That's for you city folk. Or me when I visit you, if I'm obedient. And blessed are you in the field. Blessed is the fruit of your body, and the fruit of your ground, and the fruit of your livestock, the increase of your cattle, and the offspring of your flocks. Blessed is your basket and your kneading bowl. Blessed are you when you come in, and blessed are you when you go out. Yehovah causes your enemies who rise against you to be smitten before your face. They come out against you one way and flee before you 7 ways. Yehovah commands the blessing on you in your storehouses. So that's abundance to be able to store away. In all to which you set your hand, and shall bless you in the land of which Yehovah your Elohim is giving you. Yehovah does establish you as a set-apart people to himself, as he has sworn to you, if you guard the commands of Yehovah your Elohim and walk in his ways. If you do not guard his commands and walk in his ways, he will not establish you. And all the peoples of the earth shall see that the name of Yehovah is called upon you, and they shall be afraid of you. And Yehovah shall make you to have plenty of what is good, in the fruit of your body, in the fruit of your livestock, and in the fruit of your ground, in the land of which Yehovah swore to your fathers to give you. Yehovah opens to you his good treasure, the heavens, to give the rain to your land in its season, and to bless all the work of your hand. And you shall lend to many nations, but you do not borrow. And Yehovah shall make you the head and not the tail. And you shall be on top and not beneath, if you obey the commands of Yehovah your Elohim, which I command you today to guard and do. Now, we don't need to go through everything that you would normally have to in a Christian setting. I'm the head and not the tail, I'm above and not beneath. And you're not unless you obey his commandments. If you don't obey his commandments, you have no position to be the head and not the tail. Why am I saying this? He's more concerned about you than stuff. Stuff is the bonus. It's the extra. If you do right in your business dealings, in your relationships, in your endeavors, in your pleasures, in your leisures, etc., if you do right, not in your own eyes, and you not in the eyes of men, but if you do right by Elohim toward him and toward men, then this is the additional that comes. Then he will judge in your favor, and you will reap a blessing. I believe Jacob leaves with the abundance that he does because he was a changed man. Because in those circumstances, it proved him to be different. Because old Jacob would have been deceptive because he was deceived. Would have been conniving because Laban connived him. Because Laban tricked him, he could have been the trickster. Let's go to 1 Samuel 24. I'll give you another example. We're almost done. Hallelujah. 1 Samuel. Y'all going to be there before me. 24. David's hiding from Shaul, who's trying to kill him. David's got a whole bunch of men around him. You know where David got those men? He got the men nobody else wanted. He got the men that got kicked out of every town and city in the area because they were thugs. I mean, he had a good posse around him to protect him, but he did not have the kind of men you want to get counsel and wisdom and righteousness from. So here's the story. David's in a cave hanging out. Saul's running around all over the countryside looking for David. He's got to go to the potty. So Saul goes, I'm going to go up in that cave and go to the bathroom. You know, king does his business indoors. Goes up in there, and David's men see Saul come and say, listen, David, don't you see what's happening? God's putting him in your hands to kill him. This is your opportunity. You can kill him. So David thinks about it a little bit. I think David thought about it a lot, actually, in a very short window of time. Considering David is able to pull a knife out, come up to the back of Shaul, and cut a piece of his garment off, I think up until that moment, David was working to corral himself to do the right thing. And I think that says something to us about how we can be. Sometimes the battle takes a little while. But let's pick up in verse 9. And David said to Shaul, why do you listen to the words of men who say, see, David seeks to do you evil? See, this day your eyes have seen that Yehovah gave you today into my hand in that cave. And one said, to kill you. But my eye pardoned you. And I said, I do not stretch out my hand against my master, for he is the anointed of Yehovah. David's recognizing that the Father set this whole thing up. But David's also recognizing that the Father didn't set this whole thing up so that he could kill Saul. Rather, so David could find out what kind of man he was going to be. And my father, see, the corner of your robe is in my hand, for in that I cut off the corner of your robe and did not kill you. Know and see that there is neither evil nor rebellion in my hand, and I have not sinned against you, while you are hunting my life to take it. And listen to this. Let Yehovah judge between you and me, and let Yehovah revenge me on you. But my hand is not against you. Boy, if we could be more like David. You know, he's had spears thrown at him. The king of the whole nation is just parading around Israel trying to find and kill David. And he's killing left and right people who helped David, even to the point of killing the priests. But David wouldn't touch him. I guess the point is this. You may have a right. You may even have a legal right on the earth. But that doesn't make it right. What matters is what is right in the eyes of the King of Heaven. And Elohim will test you by putting them in your hand. What will you do then? When you have the opportunity to slander the slanderer, when you have the opportunity to rob the thief, when you have the opportunity to abuse the abuser, when you have the opportunity to destroy the destroyer, or whatever way you want to look at this, what will you do then? When they've slandered your name, when they've smeared your reputation, will your character hold? See, reputation is bogus because reputation is what people think of you. But character is who you are. And when they smear your reputation, you're sure enough going to find out what your character is. A few more words. Remember, the whole purpose is to make you like a son. Not to give you a house, not to give you land, we're not doing this thing, and we're not trying to be right to get stuff. We're not trying to be obedient to get things. If that's the motive, you're going to miss it every time. The point is to grow to be a better son, to grow to be a better daughter. Jacob leaves from this conversation with Laban, and he has another encounter with the father. And the father changes his name and says, your name is no longer Jacob, the supplanter, the heel grabber, but your name is now Israel, one who strives with Elohim and man and prevails. One who has learned how to be victorious is literally what that means, with God and with man. That says to me that something shifted in Jacob. That to be victorious with God and man isn't to be conniving, isn't to be deceptive, isn't to go about it that way. Sometimes we think in the world system we got to play the game the way the world plays it to get ahead. That's not how it works. And we see a humble difference in Jacob, and we'll see this next week, but I can bring it up now. When he's face to face with his brother who wants to kill him, he's got this whole family behind him and all of this stuff, and he just starts sending his stuff in droves. And when he gets to him face to face, Esau's like, "What is all this stuff?" He says, "This is a gift for you from your servant." And I don't think he means it condescendingly. I think Jacob changed. And he comes in this posture of humility, which is really different than the way Jacob left his brother. And that's probably what kept Esau from killing him. Maybe, just a few closing thoughts, maybe the Father, the King of Heaven, will say to us, "I am the Elohim of Avraham, your father." To want to be a son is to want to be like Avraham. It's to want to be like Yeshua. He knows what he's doing. He knows what he's doing with you, and when you return, you will be a different man. Maybe even have a different name. But one thing's for sure, you will never be the same. Your character, your integrity, your morality, your ego, your humility, your patience will all be tested, tried, furnaced, and proved. And in the end, it will be tov. I want to read that one more time because when I wrote it, I knew it was important. And I knew it again when I read it. He knows what he is doing with you. He knows what he is doing with you. And when you return, you will be a different man. Maybe even have a different name. One thing is for sure, you will never be the same. Your character, your integrity, your morality, your ego, your humility, your patience will all be tested, tried, furnaced, and proved. And in the end, it will be tov. In the end, you will be in place. And it will be at the right time. And in the end, you will be doing what you're supposed to be doing. Jacob becomes the father of a nation. And I think everything that happened in this Torah portion has everything to do with why the father chose Jacob and not Esau. Be a Jacob. We may not start out that good, but he can mold us into something better. Father, we give you honor, we give you glory, we give you praise. Your word is a surety in our lives. We cling to it, Father, in hope, in confidence, in expectation, Father, that you are doing something in us. Father, today we choose to trust in the fact that you know what you are doing. We choose to recognize that we may not in this moment be able to see it. And we may not in this moment even be able to see ourselves. But Father, thank you for the circumstances you have us in right now. For you are working out tov in our lives. So continue to have your way, Father. If more pressure is needed, Father, may it come with your grace. If more challenges await us, Father, help us be ready. But nevertheless, Father, we leave ourselves in your hands to make us who you want us to be. Make us your sons. Make us your daughters. In the name of Yeshua, our Master, we pray. Amen.